Hey, welcome back. I'm Sandy Gard. Today we're covering part 5 of the 5-part Setting Boundaries workshop. Be sure to check out the other videos on YouTube if you haven't tuned into those yet. This work was inspired by my communications in the addictions recovery field with clients. Boundaries are a common topic, but it's useful for everybody in my opinion, just general wellness information. Good mental health stuff. So I invite you to check out my services at ggirllifestyle.com if you are interested in addiction recovery services or general healing and wellness. So here we go. So in this module of part 5, we're covering the following topics: what's called the acclimation period, responses to boundaries, creating consequences for boundary violations, maintaining boundaries with difficult people, and how to go about honoring your boundaries. Setting boundaries is important, but we must practice keeping them. This can be both challenging and exhausting. We may need to start over at times, but it is worth the effort. The acclimation period. Changing a long-term behavior can be challenging. Be patient with yourself and others with whom you didn't previously have boundaries. An adjustment phase can be expected, but it's important that you firmly and consistently keep your boundaries in place. Don't be wishy-washy when you want to avoid an argument or it didn't feel like a significant boundary violation. When we find ourselves back at square one, it may feel harder to set and maintain a boundary moving forward. I invite you to role play the following scenarios with trusted friends or family members. It's an opportunity to act out how you can reinforce a boundary. Firm yet compassionate responses would be ideal. So here's the first scenario. You have an aunt that always asks you invasive questions about having children. You've told her these questions are a violation of your privacy and you need her to stop before the end of the next family gathering. Then she opens with a very uncomfortable and public comment. When are you making babies? Second scenario. Your friend has a habit of bailing on your plans at the last minute. They agreed to stop doing this when you asked, but they just sent you a text with a lousy excuse for why they're no longer coming over tonight. Third scenario. A coworker likes to look over your shoulder while you're working. You've explained that this makes you uncomfortable and you need them to stop, but they've just done it again. Fourth scenario. Your parent still tries to take care of everything for you. You've told them that you're an adult and you need to make your own decisions without their input. They agreed to stop, but just called to tell you they booked your flight to the family reunion. Number 5. You have a friend who regularly smokes around you. They said they would stop when you told them what you need from them, but they just lit up right next to you. And finally, your sibling often borrows your things without asking you first. You've told them that you expect them to ask first, and they agreed, but you just noticed that a pair of your shoes are missing, and you know your sibling took them. Responses to boundaries. People may react to our new boundaries in the following ways: through acceptance, by pushing back, through limit testing, by ignoring or questioning them, or maybe getting defensive or ghosting. Acceptance. Ideally, the person we're setting a boundary with accepts our boundaries and respects them. Pushback. This comes from fear of change. When you set a boundary, you're changing the structure of the relationship in some way. This person may have had a privilege that they shouldn't have had in the first place, and setting boundaries may take this privilege away from them. A good response to pushback is to acknowledge any concerns that they brought up and then restate your boundary. Limit testing. This is testing to see how flexible your boundaries are and how close someone can come to violating them before you react. Imagine your friend assumes you will watch her cat whenever she leaves town. This is more of a burden than your friend acknowledges, and you don't want to be their default cat sitter, so you set a boundary. In response, your friend says, "Will you watch the cat for just one day?" In this way, your friend is limit testing. If you say, "Okay, one day," you're sending the message that you aren't serious about keeping your boundaries. The best way to respond to this is by calling it out. Share that you recognize they're testing the limits of your boundary and how that makes you feel. You could say, "You're testing the limits of the boundary I've set, and that makes me feel unheard." Ignoring. Pretending like your boundary was misunderstood or not heard is a passive-aggressive technique some people will use to see if you will just ignore the boundary you've set. Pretending to misunderstand your boundary could show up as your friend saying something like, "Oh, I didn't realize you meant you couldn't watch the cat this weekend." If completely ignoring your boundary, they might say, "The key is under the mat and the food is where it always is." It's a good idea to respond to ignoring immediately. Otherwise, it sends a message that they have an effective strategy for getting what they want from you. Restate your boundary and have them repeat it back to you so it's clear that they heard and understood it. You might also emphasize that this boundary is important to you and you need it to be taken seriously. Questioning. People may feel confused or offended that a behavior that they thought was acceptable in the past is now unacceptable. Questioning on their part may be an attempt to get you to give them an explanation that they can then argue about. This response is at the root of why it's important not to give too much of an explanation or apologize for your boundary setting. If you explain yourself, you've given the other person the opportunity to argue with you about your needs. You may be tempted to respond to questions or apologize for any inconvenience, but no apology is required for having needs, nor do you need excuses for them. Be clear that you've changed your mind and you have a boundary that needs to be abided by. This conversation with your cat friend might look something like, your friend might say, "Why are you suddenly unable to watch the cat? You've always been able to watch him." Your response could be, "I know. In the past, I have always agreed to watch him, but that doesn't work for me anymore." So notice the person was clear about what they needed without over-explaining themselves or explaining at all, just saying, it doesn't work for me anymore. Getting defensive. When you set boundaries, people may feel attacked. This response may be prompted by a fear of change, or they may be personalizing your boundary, making it about them. It's important to be both kind and clear when setting a boundary to help avoid a defensive response, but some people will respond defensively no matter what. Guilt may come into play as well, such as, "I would help you if you needed a cat sitter," or starting a comment with, "If you were really my friend, you wouldn't have a problem with A, B, or C, depending on the scenario." It's important to address a defensive response as soon as possible. Be clear that it's about yourself and sharing how you feel using I statements. For example, "I feel misunderstood." Avoid all old issues and say you need to pause the conversation if it gets too heated. You may sense that you're going to cave on your boundaries, so a pause is better than caving. Ghosting. This may show up in response to your boundary setting through disappearing without an explanation. This is an unhealthy, passive-aggressive way to state their objection to the boundary or to punish you for setting it. Ghosting can be difficult to deal with due to a lack of communication. You may choose to wait until they've resumed communication and calmed down to address it. Another strategy may be to send a message sharing that you've noticed the reaction to the boundary, and you could clearly state how you feel about your concerns about the relationship. Creating consequences for boundary violations. Our boundaries consist of both communication, step 1, and step 2, the actions that we're going to take. Boundary setting is about addressing your needs rather than telling people what to do. The goal is to have your needs met, not to punish people. The consequences that you set into action for boundary violations need to be something you're willing to follow through on if necessary. Otherwise, they're not going to be taken seriously. Maintaining boundaries with difficult people. In a perfect world, everyone you set a boundary with will accept and respect that boundary. You're likely to encounter some difficult people, however, who will choose to push limits and ignore your boundaries. Use caution. It's important not to over-explain yourself when you're met with pushback. If you offer too many details or go into background stories, you may be putting yourself in an argument position and be tempted to change your mind. Your needs are valid and important. Unconditional self-acceptance and awareness of your needs are best kept top of mind when dealing with difficult people to prevent yourself from being manipulated. Difficult people may continue to push you to drop your boundaries in hopes that you will give in, And they may be correct unless you take action, such as assertively saying stop. For example, you could say, I've already said no, and that answer won't change, so stop asking. Ultimatums. Here, an ultimatum is repeating your boundary and being clear about the consequences of a boundary violation. When we're initially setting our boundaries, it's wise not to share the consequences of a possible pending violation, as that can come across as aggressive. With difficult people, however, an ultimatum may be in order. Think of an ultimatum as a last chance for a person to respect a boundary that they are aware of. For example, if you've asked someone to call before visiting and that boundary is repeatedly violated, you could share that in the future you will refuse to answer the door without a prior phone call. The consequences that you set for boundary violations are not punishments. They are a means to have your needs met. So here's some example of unhealthy ultimatums. Someone might say, if you don't start cleaning more often, I'm going to move out. Or, if you go to that party, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. Another unhealthy ultimatum example is, if you don't call me back right away, I'm breaking up with you. Here are some examples of healthy ultimatums. If you aren't back before 7, I'm going to start dinner without you. Or, if you keep gambling, I'm not going to loan you money anymore. And the last healthy ultimatum example, if you keep canceling our plans at the last minute, I'm going to stop trying to make plans with you. So when I hear these ultimatums, for me, they come across as being fair. The healthy ultimatums seem clear and fair and expressed well. They don't come across as aggressive, they're just assertive. Letting go. Sometimes the best option may be to let go of a relationship, especially if someone repeatedly violates the boundaries that you have clearly shared with them. Self-care is important, as ending relationships can be emotionally challenging, bringing up feelings of guilt and shame. As a reminder, boundaries make healthy relationships healthier. So make loving decisions that honor your needs and limits, and be mindful that some relationships benefit from reevaluation before boundaries even have come into play. Here we have an exercise called Practice Saying No. Think through some times that you encountered a difficult person who seemed committed to not hearing you say no, or times when a pushy person got you to give up your no. It's a good idea to focus on the times that you will be comfortable sharing with other people in doing this exercise. So with your partner or trusted friend, take turns talking through the scenario each of you have thought of and consider ways in which you could have handled the situation differently. When you identify a good way to say a final no, try acting it out with each other to see how it feels. Honor your boundaries. Setting boundaries with others can improve our lives, but the benefits of this skill are incomplete until we honor our own boundaries as well. Leading by example. We show others how we want to be treated by how we treat them. If we ask inappropriate questions, we're sending a message that this is acceptable behavior. Choose to uphold the same standard of behavior that we expect from others. Honoring our boundaries with ourselves. This can be crucial in a number of different ways, such as sticking to a budget or being firm about changing the way we speak to others, even giving ourselves permission to shine. These boundaries are promises we make to ourselves, holding ourselves accountable. Self-care. Through self-care, we honor the boundaries prompted by our personal biology and psychology, upholding an expectation to treat ourselves with care and having compassion for our limits as a human being. Boundaries with self strengthens our relationship with self. How we allow others to treat us. Boundaries extend to everyone, not only those in our close circle. If a stranger addresses you in a rude manner, you can still set a boundary with them. It's important that we uphold our boundaries even in what may appear to be an insignificant moment. This follows through and honors the promises we have made with ourselves. Boundaries showing up as being an important part of our everyday routine. Here's an exercise called Pinky Swear. A good relationship with yourself is an important part of being able to uphold boundaries in the face of pushback and bullying. Like any other relationship, making promises improves the relationship and breaking them damages it. Pick one promise you will make with yourself or one boundary you will set and keep with yourself. Write it out on a note card in large print so you can read it and put it up on a wall or on your bathroom mirror. This will remind you to keep your promise to yourself. In summary, this module focused on keeping the boundaries that we've learned to set. We learned that it may take people some time to get used to the new expectations, and it's okay to offer them grace while we're standing by our boundaries. We also learned some of the many ways we can expect people to react to our boundaries and how we can manage those experiences. Finally, we learned how to decide what we will do when somebody violates one of our boundaries, how to manage difficult people, and importantly, how we can honor our own boundaries. Hey, so here we are at the end. I'm grateful that you joined me for part 5. Parts 1 to 4 are already posted on YouTube if you want to go back and take a peek or listen to those. There's tons and tons of information that I shared in each module, and all of the information builds on itself, so it's a good idea to start at video 1. So my services can be found at ggirllifestyle.com. I'm all about wellness. My focus recently has been more around addiction recovery and helping people who want to make changes, right, straight from harm reduction principles to long-term abstinence. So whatever works for you, whatever you're feeling drawn to address in your life. I'm also a Reiki healer and nutritionist, so I have a wealth of information that I love to share with people, and I love to coach and teach and just help in any way that I can. So stay tuned for more videos around addiction recovery and wellness, and I will see you soon. Thanks. So stay tuned for the reference pages in case you want to see where I gathered this material from for all 5 modules. So here's the first page of resources. This is science-based material. I'm open to hearing your opinions in the comments or reading them. Discussion is good. And the second and last page, I'll just leave it here long enough in case you want to stop and get a screenshot. Thanks again. I'm Sandy Gard. I hope you found this workshop helpful.